Hello. Uh, how's everybody? How are you today? You can answer that in your head or out loud, uh, as I probably cannot hear you. I felt, I have been feeling called to this moment, uh, again through what I call malrecognition, uh, which, if you'd like to know more about malrecognition, I talked more about it in my last video, but the basic summary of what malrecognition is the uh, funk or reality influential pull towards an event of this state. So everything leading up to this moment right here happening as it happens. And then eventually you may stumble upon that, and that was your malrecognition pulling you towards either this video or anything else uh, within reality. So malrecognition pulls us towards everything. Um, I've been saving up a lot of things to discuss, uh, and so I'm going to try to break that down for everyone today. I've got a lot to discuss, so before we get into it, I do want to just take a moment to be. I mean, you're already here with me right now, but let's just take a moment of being present. And so we're just going to sit here for a minute in silence. All right. So either you skip through that or you were present in that moment. Either is going to be what you were called to do or designed to do, or again, malregnetically led to this moment that is still existent, or you're not watching. Again, it is all up to what is happening in your current state of presence, being, observation, perspective, all of that. Anything within the funk and even without the funk. I'm just going to go in order of what I have in my notes. So things might be a little out of order, but really, it doesn't matter. We can jump around, we can talk about things. What I have here first is something I haven't thought about in a while, and perhaps I'll have to now rethink on some things of what I meant at the time. What I have here is talking about how statistical odds and percentages of events happening and our influence upon these events happening increases the more we put focus into it and the more that more people put focus into it. But also how it also paradoxically decreases as well as things balance out. Again, another thing I've discussed in past videos: we mission versus no mission. Uh, we mission being the yes and of life, no mission being the no but, or the cancellation of anything, an event or a happening. But when we choose to work together, and depending on how we choose to work together, either things will go the way that we are. I don't think anything's really going to go exactly the way that you want it. maybe there will be a point in the future that that is possible. Uh, as of right now, uh, it's very slim. The chances are super slim. But again, if you put more focus and direct work into banding together and reaching that goal, then it increases. Those odds do increase. But again, paradoxically, they do. Now that I'm thinking about it, I guess, how do I word this? They increase and decrease, and so they do stay the same. But again, it's what you're observing and experiencing in these moments. And so either you're experiencing an increase or decrease, and eventually those increases and decreases balance out. And so is that still an increase or decrease? Um, and it becomes something that I'm going to discuss later, called a yaw. Next, I have the study of, this is just what I wrote. Let's see what I respond to my old past self. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now. Another word that came to me is what I call a yaw. And so, what a yaw is essentially anything that is no longer itself or yourself. So, um, there is a you, right? There's a me, there's a you. And every second, you are becoming the next you, and that past you is now your yaw. It is no longer you, but it still was you. And let's say that you were ever cloned, right? You would be you, and your yaw would be that clone. But that clone, you would be its yaw. And so when you're looking at, let's take the great philosophical statement of a man or a person could never step into the same river. And there's even been philosophers who have stated you can, the original is, I think, you can't step into the same river twice. But some have argued that you can't even step into the same river because that river is already different and you are already different. Again, y'all are both now a different you, and that yaw is now a yaw. So when you step into a river, you and that river are now yourselves, becoming the future yous and the past being the yaws. And so you can never re-step in the same river because you're stepping in a future version of, and you can't step back into the yaw. It would just, again, as of now, be metaphysically almost impossible. What I have written down, so let's continue after now you know, or hopefully understand kind of more what a yaw is. So the yaw of myself wrote this down. The study of influence upon reality when observed as and by an influence. When you are sober, what are you under the influence of? So essentially, you're under the influence of reality, of perspective, of yourself, of your mind, of everything that has shaped you up to this moment. You are under that influence. You are always under some level of influence. The soul, in what I also describe influence as, is soul. And so I'm skipping ahead in some of my notes right now. But my current assessment, and again, most of everything you're going to hear, not everything, a lot of the things you're going to hear, and many things I say or anyone says, is subject to change. This is just where I'm at right now in this point in time. And eventually, again, I am becoming a y'all right now, as I'm also becoming myself in the future. And so this yaw is subject to be wrong. And I am open to that. I seek epistemological knowledge and quest for philosophical truth. and metaphysical truth. And what I describe souls currently as is influence. And so let's actually, you know what? I have a recording of me discussing this subject. So I'm going to play that for you right now.
Okay, quick mind, just thoughts leak. So something I've been meditating on a lot lately is how the body is an instrument, the human body, and any body, any physical object is an instrument. And, excuse me, how the soul is essentially what comes out of that instrument when it is being used or played.
Or just by existing.
So, let's say you have a trumpet. The trumpet is the instrument. It's just a thing that exists out of molecules and energy from the universe, which constructs all of us and everything, right? It's just a different vibrational assembly of these patterns. But when you use the instrument, influence comes out, and that's soul. And I would put those two kind of linked together. Not the same, but linked together in a way. And so now soul and influence go out there like waves, like ripples. And the thought that I just had that made me want to sit here and talk about it out was, let's say that you're, when we're talking about ripples and how ripples ripple and they do their thing, they go out like wavelengths and they, until they dissolve or depending on how powerful they are. But they interact with each other and they ripple off each other and they cause other ripples. And so when you're choosing to make your ripple, like let's say you're throwing a rock into a pond or even skipping it in a pond, which there you go. Like for example, if you can make many ripples with a skip just by being you. And so you're using three instruments right there, the body, the rock, and the water, to make various sets of ripples of the soul and influence in life and the universal soul. And so you can either choose to make a set of ripples by throwing the rock in the pond, and it'll make a set of ripples that, set out from the rock that you've thrown in the water. But then that rock is used. That would be a body or an instrument. And so that body is then done. It is and it isn't, because the rock is really just wet, right? Or a body or an instrument just decomposes and reintegrates back into, again, the universe, or what I call funk. We just become funk and we redistribute into something else, or essentially back into us, or you, or ourselves, again, in X amount of time, which would be a immaculate amount of time. But again, continuing in the ripple, so when choosing to what to do with the instrument, whether you just throw it in the pond and let one ripple out, or you try to skip it in the pond and it is successful or not, like let's say you just pick up a random rock, you throw it, it may or may not skip, you don't know, and it's those uniquely shaped rocks, those flat stones, and this doesn't go for any instrument, but this is just for an example of making waves with skipping stones. Once you find that certain instrument that just resonates or is able to make that skipping happen and influence multiple ripples, that's when it's still rock, but it is doing multiple ripples and wave effects rather than in one throw. Rather than one set of ripples, it's making several sets of ripples. And so imagine your lives as you are a stone being skipped through reality, and you are making all of these ripples at every moment. Like, it's almost indistinguishable because the amounts are so small they connect to each other. But then when eventually you pass, your body just begins to skip those moments. When people remember you or think about you or talk about you, that is another wave being made. Your rock is then bouncing. Once that rock has kerplunked into the pool, or not kerplunked yet, because the rock hasn't kerplunked yet, because the instrument is still, the instrument is still there, affecting time and reality for the future ripples. And so even though the rock is both alive and dead in reality, because again, we're comparing you as the rock, the human body, the instrument. You have done your skips, but the metaphorical rock is still skipping on the lake and making the imprints. And
or the ripples are just still expanding.
The soul of it. The soul, the influence of what that instrument did. It's like someone listening to another song of the Beatles. That skips their rock one more time. That causes more ripples. Or someone talks about their grandma. That skips grandma's rock one more time. Even though grandma's rock, at your time, your grandma could have passed. Or John Lennon, let's say, has passed already in this time. His rock is still skipping because he skipped it. He skipped his rock and it caused those ripples.
Just by existing.
And now I'm carrying those ripples. I just rippled off of his rock ripples with my rock ripples. Sorry, that sounds so funny to me. The alliteration and also the idea of it. Thank you for listening. I hope this made sense. And if it doesn't, there's always tomorrow and each other to discuss this with, to try to make it make more sense. Okay, love you. Bye-bye.
And so if that makes sense in a way, to expand on that idea, I think that that feeds into why, if you've ever seen Coco by Pixar, and you have an awareness of or an understanding of Dia de los Muertos, where they place photos of their family, their past family, on the ofrenda to remember them, to keep their ripples expanding. That expands the soul. They excuse me, the instrument is no longer there or present. It's being redistributed back into the funk. But the photos and the memories and the influence of those instruments being there, or the people having existed, is still now being expanded and passed on just by being remembered. That soul is then extended. I was discussing souls with some people the other day, and someone asked me, so if a person were locked in a room, right, away from anything and everyone, no exposure to the outside world, do they have a soul? And yes, absolutely. Not only does that person have a soul, because their existence is still an influence within the entire funk of everything. Just by existing, you are influencing everything. And so not only does that person have a soul, the room would have a soul, because it influences everything both within it and without itself. The environment. That room is now within that environment, affecting and influencing that environment. That is a collection of souls. And so to expand on the rock metaphor, ripple metaphor, a rock's soul, I would say a rock has a soul, even though it's just a rock sitting there, being a rock, possibly never moving in its entire existence. it still has soul and influence on anything and everything uh, within funk because it exists. And then its soul could be extended by um, wearing away, turning into multiple rocks. Or again, someone could pick it up, move the rock, and both now that collection of souls rippled together and influenced each other. And the rock is now moved and influencing other souls around this new area. Uh, and its yaw, uh, is no again it becomes a new itself, and the yaw had different influence because it's now in a different location. So even a rock being a rock, or a mountain being a mountain, or the earth being the earth, it's a collection of influential souls. And something I heard on a podcast recently, I thought was very interesting. That I can't remember the philosopher, but it was argued that magnets had souls and amber because they influence things outside of themselves. A magnet could pull or push things. It had a greater influence than just it being, um, which I can kind of agree with because of the influence. And just that. Uh, I have another. Before I go back to my notes, I have another, I guess, audio thing. We'll do that. It's talking about. It's titled "The Internal Monologue and Speaking to God." I think it's cut off, so it says internal monologue speaking. We'll listen to what that's about. Let's check it out. Let's see what my yaw said.
Hello. So I'm just having this thought in the car. I want to get it out while I can. I still need to look into this more. And again, this is just something to consider or ponder. There's no actual proof to this. I mean, I can't prove this. This is just a theory, I guess, a forming theory. What's on my mind is, I guess, how to explain God speaking to people.
God. Or the funk speaking.
And when we get into that, I kind of want to like backtrack through history. Like, there's a few years ago, there was a whole thing online where people were finding out that some people don't have internal monologues, whereas other people do. And as far as evolution goes, what I am, I guess, suggesting here is that with technology and with the aid of connection and throughout all of the thousands of years of human advancement, that what if perhaps that inner dialogue was just not as available back then? Like, let's say back in the BC age.
And not just human advancement, but I mean like funk advancement, the thing that happens to anything and everything. I just say human advancement because we're humans discussing human experience and stuff.
Ages, like with all the Egyptians and the Israelites and such, who had the inner monologues and who did not? Did anyone? And would it be considered, when you had that inner dialogue, that this is God speaking to you because you have something in your mind speaking to you? Which, in my theory of the funk and such, when you get that internal funk feeling, that is life speaking to you in a way, or life speaking to you through the body. It is like, again, the metaphor that I gave of the soul being, the body is the instrument, like a trumpet, and the soul is what is being played out of the instrument and influencing reality. And so funk can speak through you. And when you feel those moments of like just genuine truth, you feel it. You feel it inside your entire body. It's this funk.
Or you believe you do.
That when I describe to people, most people are able to understand. what I mean.
It's that internal funk feeling.
Now, I'm sure that we all feel it differently, but let's put that back, again, thousands of years ago. When you felt this funk feeling, I'm sure that it was very odd, because things were very different for everyone. They didn't have technology and all this existence and connection as we do now. And so when you have this sudden aha moment, you think that this is life talking to you. And in a way, it is. It is your influence. It is the all influence, the schizoanalysis now impacting the individual and moving through it. And the individual now suddenly has this grand idea to do this thing. And what's coming to my mind as well as I'm driving and listening to a podcast is Moses. And when God talked to him through the burning bush. And in my knowledge of Moses was a very smart man. He was one of the first philosophers.
First time.
That we can identify. Not like the first, and probably not top 5, but he's up there. He's in there with the high philosophers.
As far as history
goes.
So
he was a very smart and wise man for his time, and he tried to do what he could, and so perhaps what I'm saying is that Moses had a great internal dialogue, and so he felt funk or God moving through him to make these decisions, and so he did. And the more knowledge that you get, the more you expand yourself within life and funk, the more that you are able to identify. It's like learning a new language. And then once you learn the language of life, you're able to interpret it and move with it through that internal dialogue. But what I'm curious about, to kind of explain it in a less miracle way, is what if, so when someone is, how do I say this? Like, what if the burning bush Moses is talking about had, like, psychoactive attributes? Like, what if when Moses entered the cave and this bush is burning, what if that smoke, made Moses, it gave Moses a deeper internal monologue, because when you smoke weed, or when you take mushrooms, or when you do other, herbal drugs and such,
psychoactive things,
you get this greater connection to the funk and reality and yourself. And so Moses, being the wise man he was, when he inhaled these fumes from the burning bush, God spoke to him. God, in a way, or the funk, or the internal dialogue, or monologue. And again, there's no proof and basis behind these things I'm saying. I'm just proposing these things because I find that very fascinating. And the way that I'm trying to encapsulate all these things in a theological point of view. But I guess that's that thought right there. And I'm only saving this so that I can expand upon it later. Again, this is not the final analysis of all of what I'm saying. This is just, I wanted to get it out there so that I can ponder on it more and come back to it later. Thanks for listening. Love you.
So hopefully, again, I hope that makes some sense to you to understand or comprehend. And I only use Moses as just like an example. You may not believe Moses even existed or did these things, but the story is there. It exists. We know Moses was a character, at least, that someone wrote about or something wrote about. I mean, we're talking about Moses right now. And so whether Moses existed or not, that story happened. And these things do happen to people. And I really do think that that is a fascinating thing of the internal dialogue. And um, as because I mean, it probably goes hand in hand with like human ego believing or wanting to believe that God is talking through them through an internal dialogue or something like that. Like you're connecting with the funk, like, but also like as far as like an evolutionary standpoint goes, when you take as long as it took for humans to become what we are, like it could be argued that like since our foundations are funk, that we in a way can transcribe or translate this funk all around us. I mean, in a way, your perception is a translation of funk. And so, again, through malrecognition, you reach a state of anything. Like right now, all the things that I'm discussing are just kind of brought to you by the yaw of me, and also just coming to me right now, live. Um, I'm just transferring the inner me to you now. And is that me, or is that the whole experience of the funk? It's both. And so it's my soul and the soul of the funk, I guess. Again, I guess. These are all just postulations. Let's go back to my notes. Excuse me. I wrote down this quote. I don't remember what it's from. I think it's from this movie with B.J. Novak, if I'm recalling correctly. I guess I'll Google it real quick. Oh, it's from no, it's not. It's from The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And the quote being, "To see the world, things dangerous to come to see behind walls, to draw closer, to find each other and to feel. That is the purpose of life." And I can resonate with that. I think that's not like the purpose of life. It is a purpose of life, absolutely. Um, but when you break those down, like if you don't do any of these things, then you're just the rock being a rock. You're just staying in place, being a rock. You still have soul, you still have influence, you still have existence. But once, let's say, let's say, because you are not a rock, you have consciousness, you have ability to move, you have ability to uh, make greater influence than a rock. Uh, if you choose to just stay within walls, it's kind of like Plato's allegory of the cave. Uh, and I guess I have to explain for some of y'all. Essentially, the allegory of the cave is like, let's say there are some people in a cave, and they're stuck in this cave. They've lived in this cave their whole life. And outside of the cave, there is a fire that casts shadows into the cave. And the people in the cave will only ever see these shadows. They don't know what's making these shadows. They only know of the shadows. And so they go their whole lives just thinking these shadows are these things. And it's not until you leave the cave that you can understand what is making these shadows. And and that's what it's arguing right here. That's the purpose of life, is to eventually leave the cave and learn what these shadows are, or else you just kind of exist with those shadows. You just never know. You just accept that these shadows are shadows, or whatever you call them, and you never know what makes the shadows. Um, I wanted to add something onto that allegory. Oh, I'll discuss that later. I'll bring that. We'll come back to that because it leads into something else. Um, but a thought I had, I wanted to extend on that I can add here about that is, uh, we are those shadows, but to reality, in a way. I don't know how to expand on that thought. I was thinking about this recently, but it's like some of us are still in the cave looking at those shadows, accepting shadows. That's all we want. And that's tradition. It's like, I'm not going to change tradition. I'm just going to accept these shadows. Uh, okay, I'll get into what I wanted to talk about later. I'll branch it into this now. And so once once someone chooses to leave the cave or has the ability to leave the cave, they see the outside world and it completely changes their entire life. And they can either choose to accept their new reality or they can reject this new reality, go back to the cave, again, re-accept traditions, and move on from that, tell no one, and then just pretend it never happened. And then everyone in the cave will just kind of go back to normal. Or to do the philosopher's duty and to bring that knowledge back to the cave. Now, the challenge of that, though, that some philosophers have discussed, and one of the podcasts discussed this, Simone Weiss discussed like the duty of, like, let's say the way that it was proposed to me through the podcast and through Simone Weiss is like, let's say you had a mathematician who was their job is to do math and to work out these equations and stuff, but the people who hired them, the people in charge, were only ever happy with even numbers. They would not accept an odd number, and if the mathematician produced an odd number out of the equation, even if it was correct, they would punish the mathematician. What does the mathematician do? And what do you, if you're the mathematician, morally, what is your choice? Do you just feed them lies and just to get that acceptance, or do you speak the truth? Uh, and I think I don't know where she eventually landed on this, but one of the proposed thoughts was the choice to run away. Don't solve the math for them anymore, and go solve it somewhere else. Be where you can actually be true and reach those equations of truth and knowledge. Um, but again, going back to the cave, uh, I think it was Plato who discussed like, or Aristotle, one of those three. When the person returns to the cave with this new knowledge, most of the people within that tradition are not gonna believe it. They're going to reject it. They're going to punish it because again, it's not the even number the mathematicians want. It's now an odd number. Going back to that metaphor. Um, and so again, what do you do in these situations? And that leads me to another word or phrase that came to me in again dreams. Uh, Most of the words that I reveal to you just come to me in dreams. They're just given to me, and I Google them, I break them down, and they just make sense for some reason. It's very odd. Again, malrecognition and funk synchronicity, I guess. But the word is Vox Manalis. And what that breaks down to is Vox means voice, and so talking. And Manalis breaks down into uh, flying or bird or to do with the psyche. And so when you put those together, it's basically saying to fly your voice, to take your thoughts in your voice, and to fly, to leave. And so when uh, to break this into a personal, thing. And so some people, very few people, uh, when I discuss these things like the funk and such, some people outright reject it. Like most people are very understanding and resonate with what I'm saying, or can expand to it or on it. But there are some people who outright just like think it's Satan, or they think it's haram, or what could be related to haram. I'm not saying that Muslims think this is haram, um, but what haram is, it's just bad things. It's not halal, um, or it's a sin, or that it's just untrue. And what happened to me recently was I wasn't even discussing any of this, the funk and stuff. Uh, but someone just was like, "No, Sean, I don't want to talk about the funk," because I was about to bring up something. I don't recall what, and I was hurt a little bit. I was like, "Wow." First off, ouch. Um, but that's a moment of Vox Manalis where uh, they don't want to hear it, and so they don't want to talk about philosophy. They don't want to hear my ideas or anyone's collection of ideas leading to this moment. And so you take your thoughts and you fly. You say, okay, this person says they don't want to hear it. They want to have their own views and traditions. They want to live with the shadows. Um, and so it's not your job or duty to demand that they understand. Take your words and fly. Vox Manalis. And so you still, it's not, I'm not saying to now uh, be against this person or to not love them. I'm to the understanding that you should love everyone and everything. Um, but it would be a disservice to just continue uh, discussing something they don't want to hear and they don't care about. And they, even if like you broke it down to where it was absolute fact, they still wouldn't want to hear it. They wouldn't want to understand it or anything, Uh, and so, Vox Manalis, take your words and fly. Move on. You are in a constant state of being right and wrong, and they don't want to help you with that quest of being right or wrong, at least in that moment. And so, just discuss something else or move on from that person. They don't want to talk about it, so either don't talk to them or do talk to them about something maybe they do want to talk about. Learn something new, what do, uh, okay, you don't want to talk about this thing. Then let's talk about something new, something maybe I don't know that that, um, because going back to Yah, it is to my assessment that you, the watcher or listener, are my Yah. Um, this bottle is my Yah. We are all just, again, funk, the yaws of each other and everything, because we're just funk particles coming to a mold, like when you mold Play-Doh, right? Like let's say I had some clay and I pressed it together, it would make the molding of my hands, right? You are the mold of funk reality. You are the particles and the energy and everything that makes you being pressed together by existence, doing your thing. Now, to also extend on that person being like, I don't want to talk about the funk. There is no way to not talk about the funk. Now, you may disagree with me because you don't think that I know what I'm talking about, or you just dishonor my thoughts or observations, uh, and you're not dismissing my thoughts. You're dismissing me because of who you think I am and what you view me as. But when you're just your existence and anything and everything you do is funk. Um, and that's how I describe it. And yeah, you can disagree, but again, the way that I'm presenting and describing this thing, it's unavoidable. And absolutely, I'm going to have people disagree with that, but Vox Manalis, take these thoughts and words and fly, uh, which I will, and which I'm doing. Because there is at least one person very close to me who thinks I'm a sinner because I believe these things, even though this quest for knowledge and the funk has brought me closer to God than I've ever been because I believe in funk. Um, and they believe in Christianity, and they want me to be a Christian. But for me personally, I don't believe in one single ideology. I believe in all of them. The collection of funk, all of those things are just different forms of funk depending on where they are in space and time, and that's all a part of it. And so I feel it is important to take note from all of them, but not lose yourself to a single one. Again, to leave the cave and go to other caves and learn what they're learning in those caves, you know? And if they, again, if you are shunned from that cave, take what you know and go to another cave. You learn what's going on in that cave, and you can share that knowledge with the rest of the world and the rest of the universe. And those who want to hear will listen, which I believe is a Bible verse. Those willing to hear will listen. I think I've expanded on that enough. Let's go back to my notes. If I can find where I was. Here we go. A friend finally got me, or someone that I met in through comedy sports. I went to the World Championship last year in Washington, and then I had the opportunity to go do a public defenders training thing through improv where I got to act as like jury members and stuff in Portland. And one of my comedy sports affiliates from LA finally got me to watch Star Trek. He made a list of basically the Star Trek star date order, like the order that things happen in star date time of Star Trek. And I've been watching Enterprise, and a really good quote that I wrote down from that was infinite diversity and infinite combinations, which is such a that's life, that's reality, that's the funk. It's an infinite amount of everything having to deal with each other and how they deal with each other and everything. I just thought that was a beautiful quote. The next thing I've written down is just something that says showcasing all of your failures instead of your perfections, which is essentially humility versus vanity. And we're seeing that a lot right now with virtual society and such, like YouTube and TikTok and everything, presenting yourself perfectly. Like right now, I'm recording this to you live. Like I'm not going to cut it, I'm not going to edit it, but you look at a lot of YouTube videos and stuff, and it's edited to perfection, or what they want to be perfection, because perfection is an unreachable goal, except the funk. The funk would probably be an imperfect perfection. But I think like when you look at the person who only shows you all their perfect moments, it's vanity, and you're showing you a fake thing. Like falling for people on Instagram who like you think that their life is going super well because they only post the well moments, and then no one supports or few people support the bad moments. But it's like that's the most humble you could get, is to just be like, these are the areas where I falter, uh, and I'm okay with that, and I want to share that so that others know that they're not alone in these falterings. That you don't have to be perfect, and that really nothing is perfect. And so I just think it'd be like fascinating, um, again, for someone like I bet like monks probably do this, where it's just like they honor all these failures and imperfections rather than the perfections. Whoo, got a dry throat. I don't have enough water for this because I still got a bit to go. One of the next words that came to me in a dream was Monafacitude, or Monafacitate as well. And when you break down Monafacitate and Monafacitude, Mona means noble, so a noble doing. Facet is something that does or is a doing, so monafacit means a noble doing. And Tate is a poet or a philanthropist. And so to monafacitate is essentially to do noble doings as someone who's seeking truth and knowledge. You're doing noble doings. And then having monafacitude is the action of, excuse me, it's the state or the condition or the quality. You can have monafacitude when you're doing a noble act or a noble doing. You're doing it monofacitudely. And I believe I have that in one of my upcoming albums. My next note just talks more about souls and the instruments of the body. I wrote down Zorstary, another word that came to me in a dream, but that broke down into not much. And so I have no idea where that could lead or be so far. But there have been words that eventually come to meaning. And so maybe you or someone else or future me now has that answer. The next note I have is unlike fan fiction, religion is pre and post nonfiction. But it's also kind of fan fiction as well. And this is another note that I have written down, so I'll just get into it now so to save time. A thought that I had recently and that I've discussed with a few people is religion and ideologies are kind of like your personal operating system of funk or life or reality. It's what you choose to operate on or operate with or use. It's like choosing an iPhone or a Android or what kind of computer you use. You're choosing what you want to view the world through and as. And like some people prefer uh, Windows 98 over uh, Windows Vista, and that could be compared to Christianity and Judaism, because Judaism came first and Christianity was just evolved out of that. And some people want to choose one operating system and just continue using that, and other people want to use this new operating system, this update, some would say. And are updates better or are they worse? Do they bring great change or not? Is it a monofacitude or a no mission? Something that could lead to a no mission. Um, and the reactions I've been getting to that, some people find that pretty interesting, and I do as well. And the computer being funk itself, reality and life, and then you're just choosing the way you want to view life. I've written down: you are subjectively less than universal, but are objectively greater than universal. You can think on that yourself. I don't have much to add to it. It could be right or wrong. I don't have a lot of thought extending off that. I have it written down: you cannot be loving if you are not learning. And I don't know if that was a quote or not, or if that was a personal realization. But to expand on that, if you're not learning, then you're only loving in a certain way. And that would be an absolute to say you cannot be loving at all, like if you're not learning, because like you can still love someone, but let's say you're not learning to in the proper ways to do so, or again you're just sticking to traditions. And let's go back to the allegory of the cave. Let's say your brother or sister is the one who left the cave, and now they're back and they're saying what they experienced, and you don't want to hear it, right? Is that loving? Is that love? And you can still love each other and these people, but if you're not learning or even wanting to hear what they have to say or do, you I mean, you don't have to accept it, but you cannot be loving if you're not learning. And I'm sure there's other examples, but we're already at 55 minutes, so I'm gonna continue to go on. One of my ideas or thoughts that I have written is we are the translation of ourselves speaking as a universe, the language of the funk. Again, like language is just a collection of sounds that we've arranged together to make sense. So if the funk were trying to talk, to everything, and Marshall McLuhan, who was a Jewish philosopher that I learned about on a Jewish podcast that I listened to, the Zal, stated the medium is the message. And so all of this, everything that exists, is the message, the translation. And so that message is speaking to all of us through itself, by being itself. And now we have arrived at that state of itself. And so we are translating that message to the present. And that present then becomes the past, and we learn from the past. And again, you, y'all, all that, yada, yada, yada. Sorry, now I'm just like shortening things down. I hope these concepts make sense. Again, these are just concepts and things to think about and to continue. And I'm just putting them in the video so that we can expand from them. So we can expand from them. Now I have to scroll back up. Another word. Now these two I think are Spanish. Alcance to mean scope, and that's Alcance, which is the scope of things. And so when you're like looking at something, like you can see within the scope of what you're looking at, right? Your view is your scope. Then Alconce with an O is the reach of things, like not just what's in your scope, but what's within all of the reach of your existence or anything's existence, the object's existence, like what's in the reach of a rock, like everything, really, the universe. That rock can go anywhere, but it's probably going to stay in the same spot because it's a rock, and it's only going to have as much influence as other things influence it. Then there's what I added is Alcaonce, which is Alcaonce, combining the two, which means it's beyond the reach and the scope, but it's also a part of. And so just like I've discussed in previous podcasts, holons, and again, for those who don't know what holons are, a holon is something that's a part of itself, that's a whole within itself, but a part of something greater. So my fist is a holon to my body. My body is a holon to this room. This room is a holon to the house. The house is a holon to the outside. The outside's a holon to the universe, so on and so forth. The universe being a holon to what I call funk. And the funk, if we ever discover what is outside of that and we give that a name, whatever that exists within, it's just more funk. And it just goes forever. What is called a holarchy is infinite, and it goes both ways, which would go into the quantum verse on the other side, which we're digging into more and more these days. And then Alchaonce, Alchaonce, means beyond, but also a part of it all. And so literally, really everything, the funk, the Alchaonce. Next up, I have written down a thought. You will lose the body, but a soul is never lost. And we expanded on that earlier. Again, the body being the instrument. You will eventually die. Maybe in the future, someone watching this, we're past that. Like, let's say we get to the point where we can live much longer or forever. But right now, we're at the point where I will eventually die. Probably you watching this will probably die. And so those bodies will move on. But your soul, just by existing, even for if it's a moment, a fraction of a second, that affects the entirety of reality just by having happened. So you will lose the body, but the soul is never lost because it ripples into everything, and it just transfers, just like energy transfers into everything. The next thought I have written down is sometimes you can't, won't, or shouldn't, but other times you have to understand how far you can reach before you have to stop, rest, and or lean or learn how to proceed. Meaning like it's kind of science in a way. Reality and many things that we know today we thought were not possible, and someone eventually pushed that boundary, and they learned that, like, oh wow, like we can go farther than that. But then much time goes by where we think that that is the finality, and so we have to stop and rest and learn more about this new coming reality and all the existing realities of itself before we can take another step, right? And when you are ready, eventually things will stretch further until they can't, won't, or shouldn't. And so again, we'll keep reaching these next moments until eventually you can't, eventually you won't, because you might be dead or have the inability to do or shouldn't. Like opening Pandora's box. Like you probably shouldn't do that, but someone probably will at some point in time. Who maybe it already has. Maybe that's what causes all of this to be, all this chaos. I just have down the question: what does it take for one thing to care for another? And that's just personal for anything. Because animals care for each other to a degree. Humans care for each other to a degree. And what does it take for each and everything to desire or want to do that care? And for how long? And until you can't, won't, or shouldn't. I've done a question: can revenge be virtuous? Which was brought up in a podcast. And I thought that was a good question to ask. And I don't have a great extension on the answer. I mean, the answer is both yes and no. Like, for example, let's the first thing that's coming to mind is Django Unchained getting revenge on the slave owners, and that being virtuous. There's many stories throughout time where it's just like revenge was indeed virtuous, but not always. Revenge can be virtuous, but not all revenge. Sometimes revenge can be spiteful as well, and that could be bad. Another thought I just have written down is it is not shameful to learn a new language, and I think that keeps people in the dark, in the cave, just believing their shadows, because once you leave the cave, you may think that, like, oh, if I learn what they're talking about outside, I'm abandoning my past traditions and my family and all these things. But it's not a shame to do that, to learn new things. Again, you can't be loving if you're not learning, to extend on that. And if that is even a correct way to state that, again, I think putting that in an absolute may be incorrect, and eventually maybe that's going to change. This one's fascinating. So I was talking with a friend about the chicken and the egg, which came first, and really, I think the answer to that is the egg came before the chicken. because as far as evolution goes, whatever laid that egg was not a chicken, and what came out of the egg was then a chicken, by evolution. Just the way things change, or mutation, or anything. Some sort of bird, very chicken-like, laid an egg, but it was not a chicken. Um, it maybe had chicken-like qualities, and that's another philosophical debate. Like, what makes a cup a cup, right? You can break that. You can flatten a cup into a saucer, but you can still drink out of that saucer to a degree. And so, what makes a cup a cup? What makes a chair a chair? Like, if you remove atoms from a chair, at what point does it stop being a chair, right? So, I would argue the egg came before the chicken, and the chicken came from the egg, which I thought was very fun. And the person that asked me the question agreed at that point in time, which is nice to be agreed with, but it doesn't always help, and isn't always helpful. But moving on. The last thing I have, I believe this is the last thing I have, is something I heard on a Jainism podcast about through the religion Jainism, speaking that anything spoken with great passion is untrue. And what they extended on is mostly like anything through extreme anger, is mostly untrue. But they phrase it as extreme passion. And so if you're in, like, I'm blanking on the word, but a if you're so passionate that, the word coming to me is hyperactive, but it's not hyperactive. Um, I don't know, but I mean, I'm having trouble with it a little bit in thinking of that, because, like, you can be passionately honest with someone. Does that make that untrue then? Uh, I have passion in all of these videos that I've made, everything that I've written in my treatise. Does that make that untrue now because it was passionately presented? Um, at what point is that balance breached? And I just thought that was a fun thing to think about. It challenged me a bit, and I enjoyed that. And I guess the last thing I'll discuss is going to be a controversial subject, but it's currently where I stand a little bit. And again, very subject to change. This isn't an absolute. But from listening to all these religions and ideologies throughout the last year and so, and since I've been really expanding this study of the funk in my treatise, lately, for the past few months, I've been going. I listen to a different religion or ideology or philosophy podcast every day, and I rotate. And because I want to expand my knowledge in all of these subjects, not just, again, I am never one of these things. I'm only myself, ever myself, and I'm only that for a fraction of a second. Or what I describe as the Caravanic states, or the frames of reality. Like when you're putting frames of animation. Once you reach a frame, it goes to the next frame in a planck second, like the smallest degree of time. And now that last frame is the yaw of this frame, as it continues. And the controversial thing, through the narratology of all of these subjects, it really seems that, let's discuss heaven, right? heaven would be this thing that's kind of uh, it's beyond this, right? It's the ultimate goal. It's something that is without suffering, um, and beyond anything we can even imagine, right? The way they propose it, or like nirvana, or any other phrasing of heaven or these things. And so when you look at reality, life, or the funk that we exist within, I would kind of postulate that this is what some would describe as hell or the devil's playground. Because it's not heaven, right? We exist outside of that, um, and the existence that we exist within is based off of suffering. Everything has to suffer to a degree to get to the point where it's at, and even happiness. Uh, when you look into the Buddhist tradition and how they discuss even happiness and attachment eventually leads to suffering. Something that makes you very happy, when you lose that thing, now you suffer, right? And so, what I've been contemplating on lately is that this existence and plane that we're in is kind of the test zone. And Buddhists would also argue kind of that, and some other religions. We're being tested to see our decisions and what we do and how we affect each other and everything. Um, and we either are punished or rewarded for those things. And that's just the way the funk provides. It will provide you with punishment or a reward or a neutrality. It just, it'll provide you with just your being. Um, Again, the we mission, the no mission, or the key mission. We mission being the yes and, no mission being the no but, key mission being the combination of the two. Uh, and I think that's just fascinating. And so it's like the test is to learn or not. It's just exist in this state of being with each other and how we choose that operating system. And if we want to upgrade it or not. And if we want to be a part of that upgrade, and whether we choose these upgrades out of Monafacitude, noble doing, or greed, or taking advantage of others. Like, um, let's say an operating system, using the metaphor, not an actual operating system or even an operating system. Let's say that um, those in charge of that operating system upgrade the operating system to do something to take advantage of those using the operating system. That's, like now all these people are following that operating system, but it was developed out of um, taking advantage of the people who use that. Versus, let's say, an operating system uh, provides those with great opportunities and brings them together in rewarding ways. Um, but then that gets into the argument of like, what is successful, what is rewarding, what is all these things, and it depends on who you are and how you're choosing to exist in this reality and what you're choosing to do with your instrument and how you want your soul to affect reality in the funk forever. Every action and decision you will ever make has, again, immaculate impact on all of this. Which is why I'm here right now talking to you and sharing these ideas, whether anyone is listening or not, because I can't get it out of my head to not. I just feel, again, all the philosophy and things that I've learned, that's what so many philosophers argue, is that, like, you just got to do what you believe, uh, whether that is right or wrong. And we're just going to have to deal with it because we are in the plane of suffering. And so we're going to exist with people who their right is to, not right like they're given right, but like they believe it's right to hate and kill others, and cause more suffering. That is where they find their faith. And we either accept that or we don't. And if you accept that, then it's almost a cancer that overwhelms the body, or the universe, or it's Alchaonce, Alconce, its reach or scope, or what is within its reach and beyond. And so, for anyone listening, I hope that you use yourself for, again, what you believe is the greater good, and to continue to learn and challenge yourself on what is that good and greater good. Because we're going to make mistakes and we're going to suffer. And that's how each of us learn, is through all that. And it's just the way it will be. And so I don't think, at least currently, that there is a worse eternal suffering outside of this. Like when you compare heaven and hell. Again, I think that this may be it. This may be the hell. It's not like all fire and flames and eternal like damnation and stuff, but it also is. We've been damned to exist in this plane of suffering. And sometimes those moments are good and bad. And it's not until we move on that we may or may not reach heaven with that level, with nirvana or anything. Or again, that our metaphysical beings just redistribute into this eternal suffering until it perhaps evolves into not that, through itself. Until the suffering becomes a yaw. And the example that I could kind of give to that is like what kind of bled into that, beyond all the philosophy and everything. A visual representation would be the good place, and how all these characters exist. They believe they're in the good place at first, then they learn they're in the bad place, and then now that they know that they're in the bad place, they are seeking on how to leave the bad place to the good place. But then they get to the good place and they realize the good place isn't so great. And even the people in the good place are like, wow, this is pretty boring. And we've been here for so long that it's just like, we don't want to be here anymore. And then eventually they continue to work through time and all that, because time exists differently there, to move on into a plane of non-existence, which I would say the Buddhists argue as nirvana. And all of that. I just think that currently, as a philosophical thought and debate for myself, and maybe now even for you, I think that is a fascinating thing to think about. It's not something to be like depressed about and stuff. I'm sure it could be depressing to some of you listening to this and such. But again, it's what you choose to do with now every moment and decision and action, to be present. And through the last few years, ever since I finally started writing down these thoughts and ideas, because I've been studying them or forming them for a long time. But it hasn't changed in the last few years, at least, what I think it means to exist. The meaning of life is to be present, to just do you, whatever you are going to do. And it's going to be right, it's going to be wrong, it's going to be both. It's superpositional, and you'll never know what it's going to be until it happens. and how the funk reacts to it. How all of your y'all will react to it. So that's basically it. I thought this episode was going to be much longer. I guess only an hour and 20. It's good to get all these thoughts finally out. I'll probably be adding these thoughts into my treatise, which I have published a few copies from a June edition last year. Every time I go through it and do a full edit, I'll probably publish a few copies just to have physical copies, though everything is free online digitally for anyone to read and everyone to debate and add on to, because that's the goal, is to just take this information and evolve with it until it expands and evolves and it changes into something else, greater or worse. It just is what it is. And so thank you for being here. If you're still at this point, and thank you for being here, even if you're not at this point and you're not listening to me right now. I'm speaking to you from the beyond. I love each and every one of you and everything, even if you don't think so, and even if you're still wanting to cause me suffering and shit. I will do my best to love you in the ways that I can, always. And again, I'm always terrible with buys, but that's about it. So y'all have a wonderful day, wonderful life. It will and won't be. Take care. Love you.